What is crack-a-lackin' Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale coming at you with some Russell Westbrook talk, believe it or not. But before we actually get started, just our usual reminder / plea around these parts to subscribe to us wherever you're getting your podcast. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please, it helps us a ton if you hit that like button and subscribe to us permanently as we continue and try and build up this community. Word of mouth as well. So if you're already listening to this podcast, watching this on YouTube, tell friends, family members, acquaintances, random people on the internet, coworkers, anyone you know that likes the NBA. We cover the entire league at large. Go through the rest of our library. We try and talk about every single team as often as possible. We do exercises where we go through every single team. We normally break it down by division or conferences. The job is extremely thorough. We are extremely underrated. Hit that subscribe button wherever you're getting your podcasts, or also on YouTube as well. It would really appreciate it. And as I say every single time, I am endlessly grateful for all the listeners and YouTube watchers, subscribers that we have, as well as on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can find all our socials in the podcast description, in the YouTube description, and also consider checking out our Discord. We have a great community building up. It's up and coming there as well. Any team, we talk about everything. So the link is also in the YouTube description and the podcast description. Let's dive into this Russell Westbrook stuff, though, because I feel like we don't talk about the Lakers enough on this podcast, I guess, as it relates to when they were in the Kyrie Irving news. Everyone talks about the Lakers, though, so I don't feel a need to add something unless I think I have an original thought or something that's important. And I'm not someone who has fallen on the side of Russ is deeply underrated, but I'm also not someone who has fallen on the side of the Lakers or Russ's fault. And I think that we've started to veer way too far into this direction of blaming Westbrook for a lot of what's wrong with the Lakers when they should have known what they were getting into. And I think so. The latest news, Woj broke it late Friday night. Talk about a news dump. He separated from his agent, Chris Foucher, who he gave these quotes to Woj. I'm going to read one of them here, but it was just unlike anything I've really ever seen released publicly. Talk about what felt like damage control, or he was trying to communicate, Chris Foucher, that Russell Westbrook is in the wrong. It felt like he intimated Russ made a trade request to the Lakers. That came out and said Russ never made a trade request to the Lakers. Let's read the statement that Chris Foucher said. I represented Russell Westbrook for 14 years and am proud of our partnership, which included a highly successful 2008 draft, a supermax contract, and the only renegotiation of an extend max contract in history. I also supported Russ through his rise into a prominent fashion industry figure and recently orchestrated 3 successive trades on Russell's behalf, culminating with the trade to his hometown Lakers. Each time teams gave up valuable players and assets to acquire Russell, and each time a new organization embraced his arrival. We did it together with grace and class. Now, with the possibility of a 4th trade in 4 years, the marketplace is telling the Lakers they must add additional value with Russell in any trade scenario. And even then, such a trade may require Russell to immediately move on from the new team via buyout. My belief is that this type of transaction only serves to diminish Russ's value, and his best option is to stay with the Lakers, embrace the starting role, and support that Darvin Ham publicly offered. Russell is a first ballot Hall of Famer, and will prove that again before he is retired. Goes on, unfortunately, irreconcilable differences forced them to be no longer working together. I don't know what that says about anybody in this scenario, but it kind of, drags Russ under the bus here by saying he really wants a trade from LA, and his former agent, didn't agree with him. And they're at the point where, with Russ is going to enter the open market next summer, he will be a free agent. His former agent Chris didn't want to have to be have the burden of negotiating his next contract, which I wouldn't want that job either, because Russ's value was so divisive as it stood anyway. And to just add this stretch where his value really plunged with the Lakers, we were talking about, would the Lakers give a 1st-round pick to dump him, to just get off him? We're talking about a team that didn't have flexibility, and it was going to take a 1st-round pick just to get off Russ's salary without sort of guaranteeing that you're even going to get an upgrade. I take issue with that this narrative, and I hate that word, continues to be spun that this is all Russell Westbrook's fault. And we even saw it. I mean, you talk about just people when they come up with trades, like they're blaming Russ because he couldn't fit with the team. They're blaming Russ because he committed so many turnovers. They're blaming Russ for pouting after he was benched in the 4th quarter later in the season. They're blaming Russ because he's taking jumpers and not making enough of them. And look, all that's fair. Russ did not do what LA thought he was going to do when they brought him in. He still took, his jumpers were just not good. He had a 39.3 effective field goal percentage on pull-up jumpers, one of the worst marks in the league for anyone at high volume. The single worst mark in the league for anyone who attempted at least 5 pull-up jumpers per game. He hit under 30% of his catch and shoot threes. That number did wax and wane as the season went on. So there was some merit to, could he work off the ball a little bit? People have complained that he never set enough ball screens. Those are all fair complaints. I think the biggest argument in favor of acquiring Russ, insofar as it existed, was, well, what can he do when LeBron and AD are off the court? And the team was awful. They were a minus 7.3 points per 100 possessions. Teams outscored them by 7.3 points per 100 possessions when Russell Westbrook played without LeBron and Anthony Davis. Russ was not good, but I'm very uncomfortable with the way that everything is being sort of blamed in his direction. And did he accept enough culpability behind the scenes? It certainly does not seem like it. But you also have reports like this from Brian Windhorst of ESPN. I'm going to play this clip right now.
I don't think enough people talk about this Russell Westbrook exit interview, because what Russ said, and that was just a couple of parts of it, he went on for 20 minutes, was borderline delusional. And basically what Russ did at the end of that Lakers season was take no personal accountability for the way the season went down and blamed most of it on his coach, Frank Vogel, for not setting things up and in defining things more for him to be successful. And then he partially blamed it on LeBron and Anthony Davis too, where he said that they didn't change their games when Russell himself changed almost nothing. And so to listen to someone talk like that, when I heard that press conference, I remember saying, oh my God, like, this guy never had any intention of changing his game and has no intention of changing his game. So,
look, that is not great. And again, Russ deserves so much blame here, but can we not lose sight of why Russ was in LA in the first place? The front office made the decision to acquire him, and LeBron and AD apparently pushed to acquire him. That trade was billed as a terrible fit in the moment. And there are a lot of times where you look at trades in the moment, you have your reflexive reactions, and you go back, hindsight is 2020, and everything is fine. You were wrong, or it turns out better than expected. This was one of those things that you could see was going to be a disaster from the moment that it happened. They gave up so much value, they obliterated their depth. It's not Russ's fault that they obliterated their depth. It's also not, even if you think that LeBron and AD wanted Russ, it's not their fault that the team went out and acquired Russ. It's not Frank Vogel's fault that he was unable to fit Russell Westbrook onto a team that wasn't built to fit Russell Westbrook. You don't want to build a team to fit Russell Westbrook in the year 2022. I also get that. But you put him alongside another ball-dominant guy in LeBron James, don't really surround him with a ton of shooting or defense. What did you think was going to happen? And I'm not even saying if the Lakers wanted to move on from Vogel, I'm so intrigued with the job that Darvin Ham is going to do. People around the league have said nothing but great things about him. There's fine. There was a basis for firing Vogel anyway, I guess. I still think he received too much of the blame as well. Gino was not receiving still. All this time after, enough of the blame, the front office, Rob Pelinka, Kurt Rambis apparently, and Linda Rambis apparently have these, really powerful voices still behind the scenes. And then, of course, the team's primary governor in Jeannie Buss. This is like, you can't let these people skate by. They made the decision, whoever it was among those four, however it went down, they didn't re-sign Alex Caruso. If AD and LeBron wanted Russell Westbrook, guess who had to sign off on it first? Part of being executives of a team is knowing when to not listen to your stars. And it's some organizations are going to turn the entire fate of their franchise over to those stars because of how important they are on the court. That doesn't mean that they need to be the end all be all of the voices off the court. And I'm not trying to diminish how smart certain players can be, but it was very clear that Russ wasn't going to be a good fit and that this was sort of a flashy name acquisition. You need to be able to, part of your job as Jeannie Buss, as Rob Pelinka, as Kurt and Linda Rambis, I guess, you need to be able to say, no, they're wrong. Like, we're going to go the Buddy Hield route because that was on the table. Or we're not going to make a move at all because, hey, fucking guess what? Wings are valuable in this league. And you traded away two of them, essentially in KCP and Kuzma, then let another really like a guard, but a great defender in Alex Caruso walk for money that you could have paid him because you're worried about your luxury tax bill. Like, those are the people that deserve the blame in this. It's not Russ for refusing to change, because you want to know what's happened at every single stop in Russell Westbrook's career? He hasn't changed. This isn't like breaking news here that Russ wants the ball in his hands, that Russ is going to dribble into bad jumpers, that I do think his turnover issues were exacerbated this year. Turned the ball over on 18.1% of his pick and rolls. That happened. Guess what? James Harden turned the ball over on 18.1% of his pick and rolls this past year too. It's probably the worst season we've seen from James Harden in quite some time, but there were worse players in the NBA when it came to turnovers. Russ might have been the single most detrimental player among high volume players. Just looking at what happened to him on defense, like he was sometimes there's like a lot of pomp and circumstance to his defense. It didn't even feel like there was that this year. Guess what? Russell Westbrook has never pretended that he was going to change. He's been moved from team to team for real value in certain instances these past few years. Specifically when OKC traded him to Houston, they really won that deal. That was sort of the start of the fall. There was already rumblings about that while he was in OKC, that he would be, and we kind of knew that when Kevin Durant left, that he's maybe not the easiest person to play with. I'm not talking about his personality, though maybe that's grating on some. I'm just talking about his style of game. And if he wasn't going to play off the ball a ton, if he wasn't going to be an efficient jump shooter, if he wasn't going to be a frequent ball screener, there were going to always be issues there. That has now happened at every stop, even when he's played well. He had high moments in Houston towards the second half of the season. He had high moments in Washington towards the second half of the season. It still just didn't work out there. And these teams constantly talk themselves into acquiring him for value. I mean, Washington gave up the least amount of value when you look at it in that trade, but the Lakers and then the Rockets specifically, yeah, there are competing agendas here. James Harden didn't want to play with Chris Paul anymore. Part of your job as a front office would be to tell James Harden, suck it up, deal with it. If we find a better trade for CP3, whose value wasn't great at that time, we're not going to, mortgage our entire future to get Russell Westbrook. It reminds me just of that clip where it's like, oh, is this going to work out for us?
Well, did it work for those people?
No, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might, but it might work for us.
It's not on Russ in the sense that Russ came to LA and torpedoed everything. They had other issues, mind you. They were injured. They were banged up. Who knows what this team looks like at full strength. Just having a healthy LeBron and AD for the entire year would have absolutely gone a long way. I wouldn't have picked them to win the title. I would have probably expected them to make the playoffs if we're talking about LeBron and AD playing in more games. But the Lakers, once again, like they did at the beginning of the LeBron era, took a team and decided to not build it around shooting and defense to complement LeBron and AD, or to complement LeBron in general. They specifically minimized shooting. They minimized defense as well, but they had players, enough talent, especially when AD was healthy, to paper over a lot of their issues on that end of the floor. And now, even leading into next season, I like some of the stuff they've done over the offseason. Thomas Bryant, thought that was a really good signing, especially if you want AD to play the four. Thomas Bryant can give you floor spacing. I actually liked Lonnie Walker, the fourth signing, more than most. If anyone watched him towards the latter end of this past year, his game really started to come together over an extended period of time, kind of post Derek White trade. He might need the ball in his hands, but they found touches from Malik Monk there. He's going to be a little bit bigger than Malik Monk. He can get you going downhill. He can hit some tough jumpers. He can also space the floor with the three. I don't know. It does feel like there's going to be a higher variance to his game. He feels less complimentary than Malik Monk did, but I can appreciate the flyer, and you're just taking some gambles on youth here, and it only cost you the mini mid-level exception. Would I've gone that direction? I don't know, but I'm ultimately fine with it. I love the Juan Toscano Anderson signing. You want versatile wings on this team, which you needed. He does that. He might be sort of a combo forward more than a wing, but he can defend almost every position depending on who's on the floor with him. The Damian Jones, like he had some really nice moments last year in Sacramento offensively. So again, I like some of the moves they made in the vacuum, but they haven't done anything inspiring this offseason. And so now it just feels like, oh, we're going to pivot to blaming this on Russ, who, again, Russ is at fault here because it's not Frank Vogel's fault. It's not LeBron and AD's fault, insofar as Russ actually said that, by the way. That just feels something like he expected LeBron and AD to change their games, but not himself. I just can't imagine anyone would be that stubborn or ignorant. And look, maybe he is. I think everyone here bears a share of blame, including LeBron and AD, if they pushed this trade for Russ. And if LeBron is sort of passive aggressively trying to get Russ out after he was in favor of this on any level, that's fucked up too. So there's blame to be tossed around to everyone, including the departed Frank Vogel. But this front office, the leadership in this organization has been a fucking shit show for the past year plus, right down to the way that they let the news out that Frank Vogel was going to get fired, even though it was just considered inevitable anyway. There was no way to let that leak out before you even met with him immediately after your final game of the season. It was grotesque the way that they handled that. And so you want to point the finger at anyone, Rob Pelinka, Kurt Rambis, Linda Rambis, Jeannie Buss, who signed off on the Russell Westbrook trade, who let Alex Caruso walk for luxury tax reasons, who decided to obliterate their depth for a player that always profiled as this extremely iffy fit, who decided to build a team with more ball handling and versatility rather than complementary defense and shooting because why? Because LeBron's getting older and he is still yet to ever really cede real control over the offense wherever he's been. We've talked about that in the past too, about, oh, this is going to make it easier for LeBron to sort of ease off the ball. And it sort of reached the fever pitch when he first came to the Lakers and the way they built that team, like having the kiddos there with Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram. No, it doesn't work like that because LeBron's going to have the ball in his hands. And you know what? LeBron should have the ball in his hands. If you want LeBron to turn into a screen and roll guy, you don't really need Anthony Davis on the team anymore. And he's LeBron James. So as long as he's playing near peak LeBron basketball, you should absolutely build your team to maximize his talents, not make this trade that always hinged upon, well, imagine what Russ can do when LeBron isn't on the court. If that is the primary argument in favor of the trade, that you have one of the two greatest basketball players of all time, NBA players of all time, and you're trying to envision what your team can look like on the court without him while he's still on the team, I don't care how old he is. That's fucking stupid. It's asinine. And that's where the Lakers have really messed up the most. And I feel it's cringy the way that this is all being thrown onto Westbrook, who again was bad last year. And it's okay to say that. We don't have to, masturbate to this game every 5 seconds where everyone's the greatest thing ever and every play is the greatest thing ever. And we can't say anything negative. Russell Westbrook was bad. That's one thing. 2, Russell Westbrook deserves a ton of the blame here if he wasn't willing to change his game. And I don't believe he was. I find it very hard that they would look at Russ and say, yeah, we're not even going to try you out on more ball screens. Like, why would you ever say that? That has to be part of like what Russ is going to do. Is it the Lakers' fault for maybe not trying to get him moving off the ball? Or if you can't reach him to get him moving off the ball, because there was a lot of stationary action with Russ when he was away from the ball, or stationary inaction would probably be the better way to say it. Yeah, that falls on the coaching staff. It also falls in the front office because they acquired Russell Westbrook, who has never been one to change or adapt his game to anybody. That is the primary party to blame here. And I think we need to not lose sight of that.